Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. So there was an article recently in the Morning Chalk Up about gyms writing their own programming, and the discussion sort of centered around the idea that, you know, back in the day, in the pre-Reebok days, most CrossFit gyms had a custom program that they were following, right? That was usually written by the owner or one of the coaches. And, you know, some gyms did just follow CrossFit.com, but most were actually making up their own workouts, and, you know, kind of using that as a selling point for their facility. But at this stage, there's a lot of options for gyms to follow online programming that, you know, CompTrain, Misfit, NC Fit, Mayhem, a bunch of other people who work specifically with affiliates. I don't remember the name of the company that works with MadLab, but there's a company there, and there's just tons and tons of options for affiliates or just, you know, functional fitness, quote unquote, gyms in general to follow. And a lot of them are choosing to do that rather than writing their own programming, which is pretty interesting. So for myself, I can say that since we founded South Loop in 2012, we followed our own programming the whole time. Luke is writing a program for a local affiliate in Barcelona. John purchased CrossFit Omnia in the last few years and transitioned away from following CompTrain into doing a custom program. So each of us is sort of versed in writing programming for like group classes, which is definitely different than writing individualized programming for, you know, a specific athlete or a specific person who's a personal training client or whatever. And there's a lot of pieces at play as far as should a gym follow a customized program for them written by, you know, an expert? Should a gym follow kind of a group templated program from one of the large programming companies, or should a gym write their own training, you know, based upon the goals of their members and their community and all that kind of stuff? And so there's certainly positives and negatives to each of those scenarios, and can definitely understand why someone would potentially choose each of those ideas. And so, you know, as usual, rather than taking a hardline stance on why someone should do exactly what we do or why we think that everyone else is wrong, we're just going to try to dig into some of the different ideas about, you know, what's valuable about writing your own programming, what's potentially problematic about it, you know, when should you outsource that program, when should you make sure to keep it in-house, and just try to lay out a framework for what's actually useful for folks on that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Over the last couple of years, I've actually programmed for a number of affiliates, and I've done so in like a remote capacity, and I've definitely heard from them sort of concerns about following some of the more generic blog programs, you know, the main one being like equipment and space considerations. And I think that that's probably one of the things that most people find one of the biggest challenges when they're creating programs for their gym, as well as that the sort of coaching information that comes along with it, and making sure that people actually have sort of some context that's being laid out in the class, and it's not just a workout up on the whiteboard. What's interesting as well is the programming I've done for gyms that I've not necessarily physically been at has always, it's never really gone beyond, for instance, like a year. And I think that it's fairly important to actually have some awareness of like what the culture is at the gym, especially about the space and the considerations there, understanding who the coaching staff are, how classes are, you know, is there a system that the gym goes by in terms of how they lay out the classes and things like that. And I think that one of, you know, so I've always found it quite challenging to sort of make the switch from coaching for, you know, athletes in more of a strength and conditioning setting where you're trying to get them towards their goal and being very, very objective around it, and then trying to then be objective, provide a solid program for an affiliate, add an element of fun, because obviously it's, you know, it's a lot more service based. People are going there to sort of blow off some steam, have a good time. And then as well as that, making sure it's safe as well, because I do think that one of the things that can be an issue as well is just creating a program which isn't necessarily coached too well, and then that leaves people at risk. But there's definitely some things that you can do within the programming to try to create a little bit more sort of safety and just some sort of good general training principles to follow by. So I think for me personally, I operate off of First of all, the program has to be safe. It has to be appropriate for everyone. There needs to be some element of guidance around scaling, so that people are actually able to get the correct stimulus from the session, and that could actually mean doing a different thing. That doesn't necessarily mean just bringing the movement down to an easier variation. In the programming that I actually do, I work with someone else who sort of translates it, because I'm not yet writing my programming in Spanish. But there's coaching information around that to sort of say, okay, well, we're going to change the movement up completely, and these are the reasons for that. It has to be effective. People actually have to get results. They have to be getting better, improving. And I think that, there's also a large part of that is that if the person is consistent, if they, they have some, moderately okay lifestyle practices outside of the gym, and they keep turning up, chances are is they are actually going to get better. But we also want to make sure that it's effective for that person long term. So the person who's been coming to classes for, 2-3 years, that they're still getting results from this and they're still getting something from it. And then after that, you're looking at it being more fun. You're looking at that, trying to make sure that there's a bit of an experience which, still holds on to some of the things that you love to hate within CrossFit. Adding in some different things like partner workouts, different formats of workouts. There's certain things that you can do just to make a bit more, make training a little bit more interesting than just a strength piece, an accessory piece, and a conditioning of 3 basic movements. But there is definitely some challenges within that. I've always found it to be fairly challenging getting like buy-in off the back end, just because being able to make that switch and understand what an affiliate is actually wanting from their program, because I think that also each gym has a bit of a different sense of what they're trying to get. So some people are trying to go through it with a little bit more of a thought out method. Some people are trying to just create community, trying to create good fun, so that people are just coming in, they have a good reputation for that. So I think that if people are using these programming services, then there's always usually quite a lot of changes going on within that. But I always think that having someone who can actually have a touch on the gym and actually understand what's going on in there is really, really important.
So I think one of the things that comes up with this, having read that Morning Chalk Up article, is the issue around knowledge in programming, especially when it comes to affiliates. So I can understand gyms using a templated program, or however it's put across from any of the kind of big name affiliate programs, but the coaches or the owner or both need to have the knowledge to be able to write a program, to be able to effectively deliver any program, whether they write it or not. They need to have the level of understanding of why certain movements are programmed, why different combinations of movements are programmed, why there are certain progressions within strength work or within skill work across the training cycle. And I think a lot of people, because of these services, just kind of skip over that. They never really learn it. They never really get into the details and kind of really master how a program is put together. And I think it just leads to blindly following a program, whether it's not right for their members or not, and knowing what their members need. You take something like box programming or comp train. The people writing that program have no idea who's at your gym, what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve, what they enjoy, what they hate. And blindly following that is not going to lead to the best results possible. Not to say that people won't make progress, and not to say that people won't enjoy it, but it's not going to be an optimized program for your membership base. So if you're going to be using one of those programs, you have to know if any adaptation is needed, if you need to change things to suit your members, if you need to change things to suit your layout, equipment, logistics, all of that kind of stuff. And I think people are getting too comfortable with using that without really understanding the process behind it.
Yeah, John, I think that that's a very valid concern. And I think it might be useful to kind of frame, I mean, you mentioned some of the aspects of why someone would want to follow a templated program, right? Or to choose to outsource their programming. So, if we talk about should people follow a program from a programming company or should they write their own, that we need to think realistically of what that means in terms of, what's going to replace what. So in a lot of cases, people decide, I'm just going to sign up for NC Fit because them writing their own program was the owner who's already stressed out and overburdened, at 5 p.m. the night before being like, oh shit, I didn't send what tomorrow's workout is, and frantically Googling and picking some random workout and sending it out. Right? Like that's, in a lot of cases, that's what the alternative is to someone, just signing up for something. And it's like, okay, it's probably better to have a company that's focused on actually writing programming so you have it ahead of time and you're not just like, oh, I totally forgot to do this. What's a good WOD? Google, oh, WODwell, this has some options for WODs. Like, it's like that's what's happening in a lot of cases.
And that's fair enough. Like, I think using a service like that, because the time it would take you to write it, you can be doing more valuable stuff with, that's fine. Like, I get that. I have more of an issue with the people who do it because they don't have a choice, because they can't write a good program themselves. Well, they could have as much time in the world as they wanted. They wouldn't be able to write an effective program for their members. And that's where the issue comes in more for me.
Totally. Yeah, because I think in an ideal world, it's not necessarily that you would write a full program for your own affiliate necessarily. Like, yeah, that can be valuable. And obviously, we decide that that's valuable for us to do at South Loop Strength and Conditioning, and you decide that that's valuable for you to do at Omnia. But to your point on that, it's like, okay, worst case scenario is overburdened owner operator who doesn't necessarily have the skill set to program effectively in the first place and is drowning in emails, and their coach just decided that they weren't going to come in tomorrow morning for some God knows why reason, and they're like, okay, well, now I have to wake up at 4 a.m. to go coach these classes that I wasn't supposed to coach, and I forgot to write the workout, and I have 15 emails that I was supposed to respond to, and the blog post isn't updated with the workout, and members are texting me like fucking pissed about this mild inconvenience to them. It's just like, okay, just solve that problem. If you have the money, just solve it. Don't worry about that, right? But then, to your point, it's like in an ideal world, though, that owner operator or head coach or whoever, or someone on the coaching staff, has to have the knowledge to be able to say, why is this happening? Why is this program written this way? Is this going to work for our members? Here are our space constraints. Here are our regulations related to COVID. So we can only have this many people in the gym, or we can only use this equipment, and to be able to make those modifications, and then not just make those modifications, but I think the actual most important thing as far as having the skill is building trust in members that you know what the hell is going on, right? Because most members, they don't really know what's happening with programming, but they have a bunch of half-baked ideas that they got from podcasts like ours, that they get from Reddit, that they get from something someone told them once, that they get from Instagram, right? People have, some good ideas, a lot of bad ideas, but they have something in their heads that feels like knowledge about programming, and they have their own actual experience in class, whether it's good or bad, whether, they feel like they're getting better, and they're kind of piecing these things together to have an opinion about the program that they're following, that whether it's accurate or not exists. And as someone who owns a business that needs these people to keep coming back, they need to have trust in the overall system that they're following, or else they're going to quit. Right? Because people, again, we just talked about Reddit. Go on Reddit and read threads or the various owner Facebook groups about what programs people should follow. And people are like, my gym follows comp train and I absolutely hate it. Like, here's my stupid reasons why that I think I know about, right? And they're just like ranting and raving about why they hate the program that the gym is following. And their criticisms may or may not be valid, but if you're at a facility where someone actually knows what they're doing, and you can go to that person and be like, I'm concerned about this because I read online that we need to do this much strength work in order to get better, and I want to get stronger, and I feel like we're just doing stupid Metcons all the time. And the coach can be like, cool, like totally understand where you're coming from. Here's why we're following this program. Here's what might actually work for you. if strength is a priority, honestly, like this group class program is not going to be the best for you. Here's some stuff you could do on the side. If you want an individualized program, we have that as an option. And then that maintains trust with that individual client, right? And if you don't have the skill set to even understand their criticism, or to be able to modify the program, or to be able to offer suggestions and just be like straight up, if you want to get stronger, like don't do stupid CrossFit conditioning workouts all the time, right? Like do something different. And that's, I think, where the gap lies, and people just sort of like outsourcing this, and where that can come back to bite them.
Yeah. Like I think sometimes it's difficult it almost feels like that some people, when they are programming, that there's this element of trying to please everyone. I mean, I've experienced it where gyms that I've been programming for, they've sort of received, a piece of feedback, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we need to change this, and this. And I'm like, is that feedback consistent? Is it something, is it something you're hearing on a regular basis? Is it valid feedback? I mean, is it coming from someone who understands things about training? So I think you've always got to make that assessment whether, whether the person with those opinions, whether they know what they're talking about, whether it's valid or not. But I also think that there's an element of you can't please everyone with a group-based program, and I think that is one of that's essentially the biggest flaw with a group-based program, is that it's not going to serve everyone's needs as best as an individualized program could. However, that is the sort of drawback that you have, but you also have lots of positives with group-based programs. And the general idea, I think that I think a lot of these program companies work off of is, if it's coached well, if people are safe, if there's like you've got someone just coming in off the street, if the modifications are correct, if that person's being supported through, if all those things are going on well and it's being really, really coached and delivered at a high quality, then it will be effective. It will work. These people are just coming from completely sedentary backgrounds, and they're just coming in, and they're being productive, and they're throwing down, they're doing stuff, they're having fun, they keep coming in, and that's where the sort of success comes from, and it comes from that 30,000 foot view, as opposed to assessing whether everyone is getting exactly what they need individually within the session. What are your guys like for you guys? What are your thoughts on the sort of importance of the program? Because we always hear about the worst program in the world that's adhered to and executed as best as possible is more effective than the best program in the world, which is executed horribly wrong. Because that's something that I have gone definitely back and forth with, and I think as I progress, or as I coach for longer and program for affiliates longer, I'm more of the thinking of just making sure people are in the gym doing the right thing, they are safe and they're being productive over a long period of time, as opposed to making sure that everyone is coming in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday to make sure they hit their back squat and their deadlift progressions and this, that and the other, which the sort of more nuanced type stuff that you're probably going to find within more strength and conditioning and competitive style programming.
I mean, going back to that point on a bad program followed fully is better than a great program that isn't followed. I think that is really where these kind of mass templated programs are good for people. If you're in a situation where your members will blindly follow CompTrain because it's CompTrain and because Katrin does it and all this kind of stuff, that is going to be better for your members than them not working out because they don't trust a program. All right. And I think that takes me back to something you said, Todd, in terms of, whether it's the owner programming or whether it's a coach or someone else doing a program. I think the coaches having the knowledge of programming is where they get that buy-in for the other members as well. So going back to when I was at South Loop with you, I would say almost all the coaches, if it came down to it, would be able to write a program for the class. I think all the coaches that were there at that time had that ability. And I think that translates out into the classes. I think for me at Omnia right now, there's, I'd say at least 50% of the coaches, if needed, could write the class program. Would it be perfect? Probably not, but they'd be able to do it. And I think that translates into buy-in for members and actually getting them to stick to a program. When you have coaches that understand why things are programmed the way they are, or why a progression is written out the way it is, having that knowledge is really useful for keeping people on track and keeping people progressing and actually turning up and doing the work.
Yeah, totally. Because the coaches are going to get questions during the class, right? Someone's going to be like, well, I hurt my wrist. Can I do this instead? And the coach needs to be able to decide, is that a reasonable idea or not, right? Someone wants to do whatever, the RX power clean weight, and it doesn't make any sense for them. And the coach can be like, listen, here's the point of this piece right here. You should be able to hang on to this bar, do this set unbroken. You want each round to be done in this amount of time. Based upon that, here are your options. You can potentially scale the power clean weight. You can just disregard what I want to do and gut it out and see what happens doing an RX. We can maybe even modify to a challenging movement that isn't necessarily exactly the same as a power clean, but maybe lets you kind of feel like you're doing something harder. Maybe it's like a sandbag over shoulder or something like that. That a coach who actually has the ability, John, like you said, to if called upon, write the class program, is able to make those kinds of decisions. And again, just to build trust with members, because members are going to be like, well, why are we doing this? And some members are actively pushing back. Others just kind of have that disposition. They just want to know why they're doing something, and they're a little skeptical, and they're like, well, we did this last week, so why are we doing this? And if the coach doesn't have an answer, right, they lose trust with that member. But if a coach does have an answer, and even if it's wrong, if it at least kind of makes sense and shows that they've sort of thought it through, that does a better job of building trust with members than a lot of other stuff. So I think that skill of understanding the program, understanding the point of certain types of things, being able to modify on the fly, et cetera, is really, really key to having an environment where people buy in and are on board with what's going on. And I actually think it's important as well to mention that this is probably something that matters more once you cross a certain threshold in terms of numbers of members present in a gym, as well as how much coaching the actual owner, operator, or head coach, whatever, is doing. Because something else that happens is that you can get away with a lot more if you have a smaller group of people and there's one figurehead person who everyone is essentially, listening to and following along with. And maybe you have a few kind of adjacent coaches on the side, right? So if you have a gym that has one owner operator coaching the majority of the classes, and there's a few members who have, an L1 who help out a little bit, that person can get away with a lot more because people are there specifically for them and to train at their facility. And they just are there because they inherently trust and buy into that person's, vision, charisma, whatever it is that sort of drew them to that place. Whereas once you get big enough where it's okay, this is an actual business, the owner operator is not able to be on the floor coaching all the time. There's staff members who are coming in to fill that role as coach. There's people who are joining the gym who don't even know who the owner operator is. They've never potentially had an interaction with them. That's when you start to have a lot more issues with trust, because people aren't specifically there for one person. They're there because they, believe in the product as a whole, or they were sold something or whatever. And if something is off or doesn't seem like it's going well, there's way less of the benefit of the doubt. It's not like, oh, poor John, John's coaching 40 hours a week. He's struggling to keep up with email. We know he has a few folks who help him out, but we love John. We're here for John's gym. We're Omnia for life, right? That's the mindset when it's a smaller facility. But when there's hundreds of members or whatever, it's I'm paying $250 a month for this shit. Fuck that. It flips very quickly at some point.
Yeah, I think that the coaching knowledge is really, really quite a key part within that. I remember when I was coaching in London, the programming to start off with just sort of got bounced around by a few coaches who had an active interest in it, and then eventually I took on a role which was full-time programming. But the interesting part of it was that there was always a meeting once per week, where the program was discussed for about 30 minutes. It was like, here are the intentions behind everything that we're going through. So those conversations were a lot easier to have. There are definitely some people within that coaching staff that didn't really have an interest in programming. And I do believe that, there's always going to be those coaches that gravitate more towards it and those coaches that don't. But I think that that's really important because it avoids what I think is more or less this sort of like administration of classes that you get. And, like you'll go on Instagram and you'll see, for instance, an advert for the programming and the gym system set up from a certain company, and you've got a coach who's saying snatch, and you've got 20 people in the room all snatch at the same time, and it's like, is that good coaching, or is that just sort of like good control of the room? And I think that the conversation that you just sort of laid out there, Todd, like that is what a lot of coaching, I think that there's a lot to that, and I think that a lot of people have a little bit too much focus on, okay, well, these people are going to be doing full squat snatches, these people are going to be doing hang power snatches, and these people are going to be doing muscle snatches, and they're sort of like trying to just bracket people. Although I do think that having those like systems is really, really helpful for people who are quite new to coaching, and I think that making sure that everyone's experience within the gym is somewhat uniform is important. But I also think that there's a huge part of coaching which is just making sure that like everyone is sort of getting what they need. And the way I sort of term it is that I tell people, and I've told coaches, that the program is sort of like the blueprint of like what we're looking for that day. You've got, say, 10 individuals in the classroom, and then it's the coach's job to sort of disseminate that blueprint as best as they can into those individuals to make sure that they get the right workout. But then I think that the sort of programming and the programming company, the template type stuff is there's like a lot of emphasis on the idea of coaches being skilled enough to be able to do that. But I also know that what ends up happening is people just turn up and they just be like, all right, okay, I've got to do 10 minutes of mobility at the end of the session. Like, what do I do? And it's like, okay, well, you've just done, a load of deadlifts and running, maybe loosen off your hips and your hamstrings or something like that. But I think that there's, that's me going off tangent a little bit, but I think coaches do need to actually have like that knowledge base. And sometimes that can come about from just being interested within programming, but they need to be able to make sure that, the people are actually having good sessions and they have trust in the program just from those conversations that you were laying up before there, Todd.
So I think that if we look at the question of whether or not a gym should write their own programming, that there's probably a few layers to it, right? There's the sort of worst case scenario, which I laid out previously, which is an overwhelmed owner operator without the skills to actually write solid programming, sort of haphazardly throwing things together at the last second because they're just kind of like duct taping stuff together and hoping that they're able to keep classes moving and keep the gym together long enough to potentially add enough members to give themselves a little bit of breathing room, right? And that's like worst case scenario. And in that case, if you can just find something that provides a solid program that gives coaches some direction, lays out how classes should run, gives them intention behind the programming, and offers at least like a solid product for members, like that's much, much better than that worst case scenario. But sort of like we were saying, the biggest issue there is not necessarily the exact program. Like, yeah, most affiliates or gyms are going to have to potentially modify the program that they receive based upon specific space constraints, equipment constraints, the way that their classes run, feedback from their members, etc. So yes, it's not just like, great, here's your thing, plug and play. But I think that the best case scenario, the sort of like highest tier type of situation, is that not even necessarily that a gym is writing its own training, but that everyone involved in, delivering that training, from the management of a gym to the actual coaches on the floor, Luke, like you mentioned, has enough knowledge and enough background to be able to understand what is the actual point of this training session? Where does this training session fit into the larger picture of a potential training cycle? What are the positives and negatives of different types of training, right? Should we be doing quote unquote CrossFit workouts? Should we be trying to prepare for the open? Should we just be doing dumbbell rows and walking lunges and occasional moderate intensity assault bike intervals, right? Like, what is the actual value of each of those pieces, and why would members potentially want to do, one or all of those? And that based upon that, both the business as a whole and each person working within that business can then communicate to members what actually matters about a specific training session, make modifications as necessary, and just sort of like I was saying before, build trust in the overall process. Because Luke, like you said before, we really want to make sure that people are coming in consistently and coming in for the longer term, because people aren't going to see results just from 1 or 2 hard training sessions. It's like, cool, you got to show up for 6 months. And how are you going to show up for 6 months? Well, you're going to feel like you're having a good experience. You're going to be having fun, and you're going to actually trust the coaches and the facility to do what's right for you. And so that trust piece, I think, is the sort of like top tier of this, whatever theoretical hierarchy that I'm laying out. And there has to be a baseline knowledge of programming, designing, training, etc., in order for that trust to be built over time. And it's not just about the actual reps and sets that are showing up on whatever Sugar WOD, Train Heroic, etc. that people are using. Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.